Good evening, guys. Thank you so much for attending the board meeting tonight. Can we all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty, justice for all. We are joined by 5 of our board members: our superintendent of schools, Dr. Timothy Harney; our assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction, Dr. Ted Fulton; our assistant superintendent for finance and operations, Mr. Rich Snyder; our district legal counsel, Mr. Christopher Clayton; our district clerk, Ms. Suzanne Bonetti; and our student representative, Mr. Robert Honey. Just a few announcements before we take up the meeting. There are 2 opportunities for the community to participate. The first is just before the board takes up its agenda, and the second follows the disposition of all agenda items. If you'd like to speak, there is a podium in the back with a microphone. You must be a registered Bayport Blue Point community member. If you are not, you are allowed to speak if the majority of the board votes, and the normal time allowed is approximately 3 minutes. As always, for the convenience of the community, all meetings are videotaped and posted thereafter to the district website. And if you'd like to follow Dr. Harney on Twitter, you can follow him at BBP Soup, or you can follow the school district at BBP Schools. At this time, we open it up to any community members for any new or old business they'd like to bring before the board or the superintendent. Not hearing any. There was one question in the chat last time that I missed. It was in regards to the lights. The question was, are there lights in the budget? That is, there are no lights in this budget, and if there were lights in this budget, it would have to be voted on by the board, and it also would have to be approved by the community, just so everyone is aware. But at this time, we will turn it over to Dr. Harney for a superintendent report.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. First of all, I'd like to welcome everyone here tonight and congratulate our students and their parents. It's great to see you guys, so congratulations to you. And I know I'm going to turn it over to, I believe, Dr. Fulton in a little while, who will bring all of you up. So congratulations to you. Second thing is I hope everyone had a nice break. Got to enjoy some of the weather, though it was a little bit cold a few of those days, but hopefully you got to spend some time with your families and got to kind of decompress and relax a little bit. Just a couple updates since the last time I spoke. The last time we spoke about the plan to bring back our 7th through 12th graders. So we are currently working on that. Matter of fact, I even had a recent meeting this morning with a number of individuals. We're looking at April 19th, so you may have started to see more desks in the classrooms now. They're not all being filled at this point. It's just in terms of getting preparation for the 19th. So we're looking to do that for our 7th to 12th graders. So if anyone has not completed the survey or the commitment form, we would ask that you do. We have about 1,050 7th through 12th graders. We've received about 1,000 responses. So we need about 150 more. If we don't hear it in the next day or so, the buildings will be reaching out and making those phone calls. But if you haven't and you could do that, that would be great for us. We'd appreciate that. The next piece is, as you're looking at us, the only thing that may, which I heard actually last night, that could change things if they do or they don't, I have no idea, is as I mentioned in my letter that went out the Thursday before the break, I talked about the processes. The CDC puts out their protocols and procedures, and then New York and then Suffolk County kind of do their own adoptions. What I had heard last night is that New York State will be coming out with New York State Department of Health will be coming out with theirs within the next couple of days. That's normal. Normal after CDC usually takes about 3 or so weeks for New York to follow. I'm assuming that it will resemble the CDC. If it doesn't, we obviously will reach out, share that information. That would be the only thing that would really change our start date of the 19th. So that's the only thing that we would really be waiting on. So hopefully everything kind of goes the way we're planning it to. The next thing is we've continued with our testing here. So again, I'd like to thank everyone for all their help with the testing, especially our nurses, as we've been having to test as per the county, our high-risk sports. We are now, I guess, probably more than 2/3 done with what we do consider our fall season. And I know middle school sports have started up as well. So it's good to see everybody on the field. I know Mr. Weber is working on his show as well. So there's some good things happening all around. From our standpoint is one of the things that we're working on, and Mr. Snyder will talk about it a little bit tonight. We were hoping to have more budget information for you tonight, but unfortunately, if you've been following the paper at all, we still have not received our aid runs. So that's still the thing that we are waiting on the most. The governor's budget was supposed to be due April 1st. There were things that I know that they were in session over the weekend that they were still talking about, because it's not just about the budget itself. So we're kind of waiting on that. Everything you're reading in the paper makes it sound like schools will be getting additional funds. We don't know what that means for Bayport Blue Point, but that's really the next big thing that we're waiting on, because we'll have to do a budget adoption for April 20th. So that may be something we might have to talk about as Mr. Snyder does his piece, in terms of, would we need to get together prior to that if it becomes different than what we're expecting. So that's something we'll have to talk about. Other than that, again, I'd just like to congratulate everybody and welcome. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Dr. Harney. At this time, we will turn it over to our student delegate, Mr. Honey.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. I just have a couple of things tonight. First is that the Senior Class Club and Yearbook Club organized the voting of senior superlatives, as well as the decoration of the high school lobby with posters for the class of 2021. And these are just a few of the events planned for the senior class as this year comes to an end. Other events planned for the upcoming months include a senior car parade, volleyball tournament, and more. Extracurricular music ensembles and clubs continue to meet on a weekly basis. We're looking forward to seeing most of our classmates back in the building in a few weeks, and hope to ring in the end of the school year with the fourth quarter that will feel more like a pre-COVID time thanks to the 5-day in-person plan. High school students taking AP classes are beginning to prepare for the AP exams, which begin in just a few weeks. Students at Academy Street recognized World Down Syndrome Day last month by wearing mismatched socks on Friday, March 19th. The High School Peers Educating Peers program have started a PEP social media student takeover to spread positivity and good advice throughout the district, and you can follow their Twitter account at BBPHS_PEP. And many high school seniors submitted their senior thesis before spring break, and then I just want to wish best of luck to students as they make their post-high school college decisions and plans ahead of National Decision Day, which is in early May. And then on athletic side of things, just a best of luck to all student athletes as the fall sports season comes to an end and spring starts out. So that's all I have for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Honey. Any questions for Mr. Honey? Not seeing any. Thank you so much, sir. At this time, we'll give it back to Dr. Harney for some recognition awards.
Thank you again, Mr. Miller. And again, I'd like to congratulate all of our performing music students here tonight. We are doing awards for Skamia Jazz and All County Music Festival, so I'd like to congratulate you and your parents. I'd also like to congratulate and thank our music department for everything that they continue to do. So I'd like to thank them. With that, I'm going to turn it over, I believe, to Dr. Fulton, who will kind of walk us through this.
If I could, Ms. Kiefer, if you could bring down the microphone. It's with great pleasure that we bring up Mr. Haas and that we honor two groups of students, one for the Skamia Jazz Ensemble and two for Skamia All County Music Festival students.
Thank you, Dr. Fulton. So I just want to congratulate all of you before I call you up. I think it's been every board meeting for the past 3 months that I think we've honored the accomplishments of our students in the music program. Just really shows the tremendous work you guys put into it. So congratulations to all of you and to your teachers as well. So first we'll call up the students for the Skamia All County Jazz Ensemble. We have Colin Ferdern. Katie D'Ambrosio.
Congratulations.
Early Deutscher. Sam Stenzinger. Logan Cerrone. Congratulations. Cole Gibson.
Congratulations.
Parker Farley. Brendan Mattimore. Congratulations. And now for the students for the Skamia All-County Music Festival, Carolyn Maggi. Lena Kingston. Charlie Armstrong. Parker Farley again. Logan Cerrone. Congratulations. Stephanie Capitano. Congratulations. James Bott. Congratulations. Thomas Bott. Congratulations. Early Deutscher. And Amy Borgard. Congratulations. Congratulations again for all your hard work and your accomplishments.
All right, thank you very much, and again, congratulations to our students.
Congratulations, guys. Thank you so much. At this time, we're going to turn it over to Dr. Harney and Mr. Snyder for our sixth budget presentation. Dr. Harney?
Thank you, Mr. Miller. So we actually have two presentations tonight. So the first one will be our budget, and then the second one will be our English as a second language presentation. So I'd like to thank Ms. Miller and your teachers for all coming tonight. So we appreciate that, guys. So thank you. So we're going to start with the budget presentation. We pictured this to be a little bit different, so I'm just going to kind of lay some of the groundwork for you. We thought it would be a little bit different in the sense that we thought we'd have more information. This is what we were all hoping on, that we'd have more information in regards to the state aid and hopefully how that was going to change for the positive for us. But unfortunately, we do not have that tonight. So some of the stuff that you're going to see tonight is a little bit of a repeat, but one of the major things that we had talked about at the last meeting, if you recall, when we had done the presentation, we had talked about this shortfall of about 1.3 million that was in the budget, if you recall that. And we talked about, I'm using rough numbers now, around $900,000 of that was due to COVID expenses or possible COVID expenses as we moved into the 2021-22 school year. So one of the things that Mr. Snyder and I have done over the course of these last 2 weeks, I guess it is, we started to take a look at things that one of our goals from the last meeting was, I said what I wanted us to get down to is at least to, if we were to make some reductions, at least get the shortfall down to where it was all quote unquote COVID related. That was one of our goals as we left here. We think we've been able to do that. And saying that, we're going to continuously look at it because we have until the 20th, but we're continuing looking at that. We think we were able to reduce it and really without impacting any type of student programs at all. So that's what we were trying to do. So in the end, and I'll have Mr. Snyder kind of walk you through it now, we're still going to talk about a shortfall, but we're really hoping that it sticks to the COVID-related shortfall that we were hoping, or, you know, if we had, that's what it would be. So, Mr. Snyder, I'll turn it over to you.
Just real quick, guys, if you guys just received your award, feel free to go home. We will not be offended.
That's a first.
All right, they're all here.
Good evening. Today we'll go through where we stand with the superintendent's budget for 21-22. We'll disclose some reductions that we recently made to the budget to get it into that COVID range that the superintendent spoke about. And we'll actually disclose the community-based busing referendum and some potential financing of it and how it could potentially be handled. So as a summary, right now the superintendent's budget with the reductions I just mentioned is $76.9 million, 1.81%. It still includes $944,000 in what we're calling PPE, COVID staffing, and even some supplemental support programs that the superintendent and the rest of his team are still discussing. The tax levy we're still holding at 2.94%. It's within the cap. As you're aware from previous meetings, the cap is 4.22%, so we're well below it. And again, that 2.94 does not take into account any additional funding for the busing referendum. The shortfall now with the reductions that we just made is $859,000, so you can see that's kind of within the COVID range that we've been discussing. And again, that $859 does not include any of the busing referendum should it pass. And as always, the plan has always been to fund this shortfall using the surplus funds from 1920, which we discussed here. So just going briefly through some of the reductions that we made, we spoke at the last board meeting when we covered buildings and grounds about reducing the equipment code. That's labeled there as the unallocated cut. We're going to make that reduction and use contract help for the snow. We're going to shorten the desire of the buildings and grounds team to do the flooring of the high school from 1 year to 2. Actually, we're going to lengthen it, pardon me. Then you'll see across the board we're reducing travel and conference for most codes because as a cabinet we simply just did not feel like we were going to be doing much of that. It's not 100% reduced, but a fair amount of it is. For the elementary buildings, we took the same unanticipated expenditures that were identified this year when the state aid cut was looming, and we've now taken them again as a cut, plus 2% of an allocated cut that I'll have to work with the building administrators to come up with what that 2% will be. So it's basically the unanticipated is the same cut you saw last year, plus 2%, and it arrives them pretty much at the same budget numbers that they were before. Same process with the middle school. We cut a lot of the conferences as well as gave them a 2% unallocated cut to deal with. Process at the high school was a little different because they had funds that were programs that were self-funded, like driver's ed, the AP exam. So we took them off of the top before applying a 2% cut, and then reduced their travel and conference and membership for the same rationale that we did all the other buildings. Curriculum instruction. This was proposed by Dr. Fulton. One of the things up there that you take note of is we're reducing curriculum writing a little bit. And K-7 field trips was reduced 50%. And professional development and workshops is along the same lines of travel and conference, so we reduced them. Music department, again, the process you see keeps repeating, a 2% allocated cut. Memberships, and we reduced their instrument requests down to the 2021 levels. Technology, if you remember their budget, they had a large amount of end-of-life requests for new equipment, $175,000. We reduced that to $150,000. We have been using a company called Tri-Utility to audit our phone bills to make sure we're not being overcharged, not paying fees and taxes, and that contract's kind of reaped all of the rewards we're going to get, so we feel comfortable reducing that. Cameras. Document cameras was an expansion of a program that we're going to hold off on for now. iReady training is something that Dr. Fulton, said we were okay doing that. And again, you see travel and conferences. In personnel, the contractual services was really for database support for our new accounting and human resource software, which we feel, we're up to speed on and don't need that level of support anymore, so we reduced that number. And PPS, if you jump down, you really see the big number there is the watch list and contingency. I try to, from a budgeting standpoint, set contingency and watch list based on the number of students we're aware of that are potential placements. And in any given year, it could go from 2 students to 7 students. It varies during the year. So when we set the number, we set it based on what we know in April. This year, we have 7 students, which is larger than the year before, where we had, I believe, 4. So my intention was to increase the watch list and contingency by an additional $220,000, making it $620,000. But under the circumstances and where we wanted to be with the budget, we took that watch list and contingency and reduced it to $400,000. And I guess the fair warning to the whole thing is just know that compared to a year ago when we only had 3 or 4 students on the watch list and we were carrying $400,000 to pay for them, we now have 6 or 7 students on that same watch list and are carrying the same $400,000. So there's a bit of budgetary pressure there, potentially. We seem to have broken pretty well in this BOCES code in the past. So there are a couple of things in our favor in terms of historical analysis, but there's a risk here that we might run short in this code. The community transportation referendum, this is really just to sort of kick off a discussion in terms of how to handle it. The cost of a bus is $90,270. If you were to just simply add it to the deficit, you could see the math right there. You go from the $859 that I just disclosed to $949. If you choose to put it on the tax levy, it would bring you from 2.94 to 3.11, which is still within the cap. But if you look at the next bullet, right now 2.94, based on draft data that was submitted to the Controller's Office that appeared in Newsday, we have the 10th highest levy in Suffolk County, 14th highest on the line, even at 2.94, which I found a little surprising. If you include the referendum on the levy, which would still keep you within the cap, you could see the numbers move very, very little. You're the 11th highest on Long Island and the 9th in Suffolk County. So there are probably other ways you may want to handle it. It's just to sort of give you an idea of the way I see it. The superintendent mentioned that should we get a state aid proposal that might require some additional budget considerations, we may have to potentially talk about meeting before the 20th. I think we're just going to have to wait and see what the legislature puts in front of us and some of the many strings that they're saying will be attached to it. So other than that, on the 20th, you'll see one number on the agenda for adoption. Could very well likely be the number you see here, or we might have to revise it based on the legislative state aid proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Any questions from trustees? Mr. Seary?
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Thank you, Mr. Snyder, for the presentation. Does any of this factor in the money that has come from the most recent, federal bailout? Not bailout, but influx of money?
That really is the big question. Is there were a series of federal stimulus money, some dating back to the previous administration and some to the Biden administration, current administration. And I don't think we're entirely clear just yet on how they're applying it. I know the superintendent and I had an interesting debate about how it may happen. The number that was disclosed in Newsday was $758,000. 38. My first question is that on top of the local deficit reduction amount of $1.9 million, or is that what we're getting to cover it and therefore we're short? And the answer is we don't know until we get the actual legislative proposal and read the details behind it.
It's interesting.
a flip of the coin.
We're the two people that looked at it, and we both had very different takes on it.
Yeah.
Mr. Snyder looked at it as he just has explained it. I looked at it as it is, if this is the part of the additional money, knowing what the shortfall we thought was, I'm like, we're in good shape. So we need the clarity on that, and that's what we're hoping the state runs. That's going to do all that for us. That's what we're really waiting on.
Yeah, I would have assumed that it was to help hit that $944,000 that we've allocated for PPE and that coverage, is it not?
Again, that's what I think. And this is where we're debating, and that's why we had an interesting conversation about. So we need them to kind of tell us that that's what it's going to be.
It's a half empty, half full
Right.
kind of dynamic between the two of us.
And usually I'm the opposite. So.
Yeah.
Any other trustee questions? Mr. Borowski?
So I noticed going through the cuts or the proposed budget adjustments here that it looks like, with the exception of the field trip line item, that this isn't having or going to have a great impact on students. So I just want to commend the administration for looking at alternatives as opposed to things that would directly impact our student population. One comment I do have is related to that watch list and contingency, though. That's a projected $220,000 cut, which is roughly half of the 492 that we're looking at for the total. Is that really realistic, though, based on what you're saying and the increased numbers of students? And would it be smarter to leave that on the table than it would to cut it?
You're referring to the contingency in PPS,
Yeah,
sir?
let me talk to two, I can talk to two things on that. The first thing is, and I appreciate the first comment in terms of we did try to stay away, obviously, from the students. Saying that, I should really talk about what the budget restores, right? Which we didn't really talk about. Some of the things that we are trying to restore is, obviously, and again, a lot of this will depend on guidance that we receive, in the future. But it's putting back the gifted and talented. It's putting back the flex programming. It's putting back the programs that was all pre-COVID. So that's something that is in here that when we're sharing information, that's something we should put out there as well, because we are including restoring some of the AIS program where obviously our classes were smaller this year, so we were using some of those teachers. So those are all things that we were looking to. The other piece that we've been trying to do is build into some of this, and that will probably come from the COVID money is, possibly using that, and we had talked about is if we want to put in some type of enrichment programs or things like that to make sure our students are where we want them to be after this last year that we've had. So those are some of the things that we've talked about. Now, what you're talking about from the contingency money, and I won't talk numbers because I don't want to do that with numbers of students, but really the idea is every single year there's a couple of things that happen. Obviously, through special ed law, the Part 200s, we follow a continuum of services, okay? And the continuum of services can be anything from a student needing counseling to an outside the district placement, depending on the needs of a student, okay? And saying that is, we usually, and most budgets will do this across and as a former special ed director, used to build in money there because usually when you have to do outside places, there's obviously a cost to that, right? Because you're not servicing the students yourself anymore. So when saying that, we used to put money aside for that, planning on that. Two things you can't plan for. One, the number of students. One, because it's done through a CSE process, so we'll never know the number of students that it will be. So that's where we're always just putting a number out there. Two is how many students may move in or move out. And that could change. And it's the same thing with several of our populations that could be part of our funding. Years ago, and Ms. Miller's going to talk about it in a little bit, just the change to the Part 154 regulations and what they did to districts. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's just it added an additional cost is what it did. So those are the things. So what Mr. Snyder was talking about is we originally had put in there about $600 and something thousand of contingency. Now we've knocked it down to what we did for this year. It's worked out for this year, at least as of April 6th, it's worked out for us as of this year. So that's the number we decided to go with. If you have a family that moves in with 4 or 5 students who have very specific needs, everything changes and we'll have to adapt by that. But we'll be able to justify it when we come to you at the end of next year and say, well, this is what happened and this is why we have a shortfall now. This is exactly it. So,
thank you, Dr. Harney.
Mr. Johnson?
Mr. Schneider, can you just clarify to me the different with this busing referendum? What's the different avenues here? It looks like there's potentially 3, just reading this. Either we put it into the budget directly, or we go out with a higher tax levy of 3.11, or potentially we go out with a tax levy of 2.94, and there's a separate vote for the busing along with 311. Is that accurate? Is there 3 different ways you could do this?
Before commenting publicly, I'd want to check that third method. I believe so. There's more than a bunch of ways to do it. You can take a combination of an increase in the tax levy and an increase in the deficit also.
Because unfortunately,
If I may, Mr. Johnson, if the district needs within the existing voted upon limits for transportation distance to add a bus, and it causes you to have extra cost, but does not require voter approval because you're not changing the approved distance limits, then you can put that number in the budget. But if you have a proposition to change the distances at which students will be transported, that requires voter approval, and it requires the proposition to state the money associated with that in the proposition.
Yeah, and I 100% get that. Like, I know the state law, which I don't agree with, requires anytime you move busing, whether it's at cost or not, the community has to vote. The Board of Ed can't vote, the community has to vote. We can put up any budget amount with anything in there, except for you can't move a bus from 2 miles to 1.99 miles without a community vote.
Correct.
That being said, I remember several years ago, I worked hard with a bunch of other board members, and we put together a referendum to move busing to 1.5 miles for the middle school. It was going to cost $180,000, 2 buses, and we were required, even though both propositions were far under the tax cap, to put 2 different balances up. One for the cost without the busing, which was less than the tax cap, and one at the tax cap for the busing. So that gave the community a choice to choose busing or not busing. I guess my issue is it's tough to decide on whether or not busing is best for the community when there's a dollar value to it. So is that the way this has to be done?
It's always been my understanding when you're, as Mr. Clayton said, when you're changing the mileage, the dollar value has to be associated with it in the same referendum.
Yeah, what Mr. Sider said is absolutely accurate. You cannot put the proposition up without informing the public of what the cost of the proposition is. And again, we don't always have control as to whether the proposition goes up. The board can certainly self-designate that a proposition be put forth before the board, before the public for a vote to change the transportation limits. But certainly the public and the community have the ability through an appropriately drawn petition and number of signatures to put that proposition on the ballot for consideration as well. But under either circumstance, we do have to explicitly inform the public as to the costs associated with that change as a part of their right to consider it and vote on it.
So then, Mr. Clayton, from a clarity standpoint, is let's say the Board of Education agreed to the 2.94, right? So that is prior to the busing referendum. So then is there really 2 referendums that are up there that's basically saying, okay, 294 without the bus, and then 311 with the bus, and both of them fall under the cap? I just wanted, so we have clarity.
Yeah, right. So you get into that concern too, and I guess we're taking that out of the equation that, if it was going to pierce the cap, you'd have to increase the percentage of voters required to pass it, up to that 60%. But that's not an issue. So, Dr. Harney, I'm sorry, I missed the first part of the question in terms of, we put the proposition, in other words, you put a budget proposition up.
Right, so let's say we agree on April 20th that we're going to go out with a 2.94 budget. That's pre or before the busing, okay? If we were to do that, then is there basically 2 propositions on the ballot that says, okay, the budget is 2.94. Second one is voting for busing, and then it would be 3.11.
I believe it would be 3.11 inclusive of the busing, and if the busing doesn't pass, then your budget would be less.
That's my question.
Can I try it a different way? Would it be, because this is important, because there's community members that did put this up, and I think they're going to question why certain aspects, and I dealt with this several years ago, and I didn't agree with it, but I think they should know. Could you, for instance, could we put up a 3.11% tax levy, and then put up a separate referendum for busing to move the distance, and if it passes, it's included in 3.11. If it doesn't, 3.11, that additional money goes elsewhere for programs.
You still need to, as a part of the proposition, inform the public that the dollar value associated with the change is whatever that number is, $90,270. You cannot have a proposition that involves the changing of a transportation distance obligation for the district without associating the cost of the proposition in the body of the proposition.
But could we associate the cost of the busing, but only put out one tax cap referendum? Or not tax cap, but one tax rate? Because several years ago, we were comfortable going at a certain amount. We had to go out at a lesser amount. The busing failed, and the district lost $200,000 in cash flow per year, exponentially on in the forward because the fact that we
Because I think that, if I'm not mistaken, would that have pierced the cap at that time? Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to recall exactly what were the factors that influenced that whole decision-making, but,
The district lowered the levy because they wanted to make sure if the busing
passed, we would be under the cap.
pierce the cap.
Right, because it forced the cap to be pierced if it would have gone above that.
That's what I thought. It brought it to the cap, that referendum.
With the busing, we went to the cap, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's why the busing went down, and then we lost the additional monies
No.
for the busing.
You're talking about 2016? Busing, we had two. We had one that was about a quarter of a point under the tax cap without busing and at the tax cap with busing.
Right.
So there was no plan to exceed the tax cap. With this, I'm just saying, do we have to put out two different budget percentage votes? One with busing, can we not put out the cost of busing and assume if it passes, it's included in our budget? If it doesn't, it's just goes to other programs, especially if we're looking at a negative budget?
I don't believe you can do that, sir, legally, but I'll defer to Mr. Clayton.
I don't think you can either, because you're supposed to account for everything in the
Right,
budget.
you have to account for the things that you're going to expend. So I guess, Mr. Johnson, what we could do is, between now and the next meeting, if there were some concerns about, I see what you're saying. You accrue a liability by, or you lose an opportunity to have budget dollars approved by the community.
I know what the situation is what we dealt with several years ago, but I think it's important when the community puts up something like this, and if they want busing, they need to realize when we put together the budget next week and we vote on it, that the reason why it's done this way is because legally this is what we're being advised.
Right, you have to account for that.
So they need to understand that this isn't the board deciding that we're doing a Sophie's choice, either less taxes without busing or more busing with tax.
We're operating under those constraints for sure.
Sounds like the question is, can we go out at a 3.11 inclusive of busing?
Not a question.
That's what Mr. Johnson is asking.
But with
no mention
you've got a proposition associated with it that needs to have that dollar value associated.
Again, when you're changing the mileage, it's a separate proposition.
Right, it's the changing of mileage that is the trigger, right? If you just had an existing mileage limitation and your population expanded within that existing mileage limitation to necessitate, the budgeting of an additional bus, it's not the budgeting of additional seats for a bus within the existing limits. That's the problem. It's when you expand the limits, it has to go before the.
But then that's what would go back to my original piece. Then it would be two
You're voting on two
propositions
referendums.
to vote on. You're voting one, because our 2.94, we can account for everything in the budget. And 311, we can only account for everything in the budget if the busing was passed. Correct?
Tim, I'm sorry.
Dr. Harney is saying there will be two referendums on the ballot. One at 2.94 with the budget only, and then Dr. Harney is saying busing will be a yes or no. And if you say yes to busing, you're okay with the levy going to 3.11. If you say no to busing and it goes down, the levy goes back to 2.94.
I believe the answer to that is yes.
So I'm going to.
Two different referendums, one for the budget, if you vote yes on the budget, or the levy is 2.94.
I don't know that the number for the bus authorizes you to increase the approved levy in the budget proposition. In other words, you've got to account for the buses in the two.
Oh, so you're saying we should have one at 3.
You're having two propositions.
Got it.
But the 294 has to encompass the 90,270.
Right, so I guess that's the question to the board then. You could go to 3.11, and
Right.
then it's a yes or no on the busing. If
Correct.
the busing is no, then you've picked up the difference between 2.94, 3.11. If it's yes, then you're at 3.11.
294 would encompass the 9270. I'm sorry, yeah, just,
Right. So does everyone kind of understand what we just said?
That's what I was trying to
So
say.
Mr. Clayton saying we have to
what
go
Dr.
to,
Harney said the first time around is where I am, and I just want to, we've had a lot of back and forth on this one.
but I just
We can't say that, hey, we're going to, by the increase of the proposition, by the approval of the proposition for the 90,270 and the change in the limit, the voted upon and approved 294 automatically becomes 311. That the 90,270 has to be included in the 294.
that's different than I feel like we've done in the past, but so you basically, what you're saying is if you want to put the busing in, we should go to 3.11. I'm not saying you're saying that, but that's what we're, because if we want to make sure we're at least at 2.94, we have to go to 3.11 in order to, just in case the busing passes.
You need
If you go
to,
at 2.94
I guess the easiest answer is you have to make sure that your approved budget includes the ability to pay for the things that the public approves, and that has to be in there.
Agreed, but if you go at 2.94 with the busing, and the
That would
busing,
take away potentially some other things that you, some discretion you might have to spend dollars on other issues, yeah.
agreed, so we have to go to 3.11, and if the busing passes, the money's the 90,000 there, and if it doesn't pass, you just picked up $98,278 additional in fund
Yeah,
balance.
I'm not telling you what you have to do, but,
Yeah. Does that make sense? Are we lost, or we? So we have to go to 3.11 to ensure the 90,000 is there.
We'll talk about it.
If the busing were to go down, then there'd be $90,000 in reserve. If busing were to
I
stay,
thought what I heard Mr. Clayton and Mr. Snyder say was that if we went to 3.11, we couldn't necessarily just arbitrarily go to 3.11 to capture the bus number, because in the event that that were to fail, we would have that $90,000 that's not allocated to something in the budget.
say it again?
So if we were to go out at 311, just to make sure that we had that dollar figure there for the proposed busing referendum,
Okay.
and that referendum, if it were to fail, then we would have $90,000 that's not accounted for, not allocated to anything.
Agreed, that would go to fund balance, agreed.
Yeah.
But he's saying if we go at 2.94 and the busing passes, then you just took $90,000 of budgeted money because you have to pay for the busing.
Well, I think what I was reading in between there was that, and I think, Mr. Miller, you had said it at one point, was that at 2.94, that's the baseline, right?
Yeah.
It's 2.94 with our budget as it stands as of today. And then there's a separate line item on there to elevate the tax cap to 3.11, inclusive of the transportation referendum. So
But I
there's
think
still
I just heard the opposite from Mr. Clayton on that.
yeah.
So what I can do, if you'd like, is just, I know Mr. Johnson had talked about prior referenda as well. Maybe I could put together a, quick two-pager for the board to kind of get a history lesson as to where we were and what we did and what drove those decisions in the past. Talk about what your, rights and limitations are, so that between now and the next meeting, you've got that kind of all mapped out for you.
Got it. Thank you. Mr. Capozzi is saying the proposition should include the ability to levy the additional taxes. That was really a statement, but I don't know how you feel about that.
I'd rather give my advice to the board in executive session when we're talking about that.
All right, so Mr. Capozzi, we'll get you an answer to that question, sir. All right, any other questions on the budget? So we're waiting on numbers from the state, and the board will be updated, and by the 20th, we have to make a decision. We may need additional meeting in between.
That's really the question is, based on some of this information, I don't want to leave Mr. Snyder on the day that we have to adopt it to have to play around with numbers in front of it, because we don't want to have mistakes. So the question is, we may then, because we don't have the state aid runs, is we literally probably should, just on the budget, we might have to get together just to do this. I think we should plan for that. And this way we can finalize the referendums and everything too.
All right, so we'll send the email out. We'll try to find a date in the near
Yep.
future.
Yep.
Prior to the
And
20th?
just for this, just for this. Okay.
Thank you so much for coming, guys. Appreciate it. All right, any other questions on the budget? Any community members, any questions on the budget?
Covers everything for the route, yes. The only really difference is it'll be minus the whatever aid we receive. So for example, the first year, you're always paying for the startup fee, I'll call it, right? So you're paying, it's like $90,200 and something for the route. And then whatever our aid ratio is, that will come back to us, and it's usually a year or two after the fact. Okay? But your route is always going to cost, the route is always going to cost the 90,000 whatever, and that goes up as it. Your aid, just when Mr. Schneider receives his aid, he's going to be getting extra something, 15, 20, 30, 40,000 based on whatever the aid ratio is.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions? All right, we have nothing online. Please type in your questions if you have any questions online. But we have a special presentation tonight. We are joined by 4 special teachers here. So Dr. Harney, we'll give it back to you.
Yeah, I'm going to flip it over to Dr. Fulton. Obviously, one of the things we've been trying to do from a curriculum standpoint is just share some of the things that we've been doing. And I really would like to thank Ms. Miller and the teachers for you guys coming out tonight and everything that you're doing for our students. So thank you so much. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Fulton. I don't know if you want to give an introduction.
Thank you very much. Very excited to have this presentation today, and we want to thank Ms. Miller and the department for being here. Really is a tight-knit group that is really student-centered, student-focused, and always with an emphasis on what is in the best needs of our students. I most certainly have enjoyed learning from this group of professionals, Ms. Miller and her team, as most certainly as we deal with students as they enter the district and determine what they need. They have the patience to walk me through what the changing regulations are and exactly what the students require. And so I just wanted to say a big thank you for all your efforts, and a big thank you to Ms. Miller, who has been nothing but Johnny on the spot with any question related to our ELL students. So without further ado, Ms. Miller.
Hi, good evening. Thank you very much for having me. My name is Sally Miller. I am the English as a New Language and World Language Chairperson here in Bayport Blue Point. I've been an employee in the district since the year 2000, but this is the 3rd year in this position as chairperson. So the goal tonight is just to walk you through the English as a New Language program that we have here in Bayport Blue Point. But I just wanted to start off with the district goals. I know you've seen this before, and I can say confidently that everything we do within our department is driven by these goals, and specifically the learning and the connection goals. And then also, I would say, followed by professional growth. And as we walk through the presentation, you'll see where those goals, come through with what we do. So the specific purpose of my presentation is to inform you about changes that were implemented at the New York State level as far back as 2015, but they are something that we continue to implement as our department grows and our student population grows. So to talk to you about that growth, and also to let you know about some of the departmental initiatives and projects we've got going, as well as student experiences. Before we do that, though, just to give you an indication of our population, this year we have 28 students who are learning English, and that they are at various levels of ability. So some might be entering students who this is their first year in an English-speaking environment, and we also have students who are at an advanced level. But we don't only have Spanish-speaking students. Sometimes we immediately think of Hispanic population as the English language learners, but in our district we actually are fortunate enough to have various language backgrounds. So just as a point of information, maybe that's something you didn't know, about the district here. And also just to give you some background on the terminology within our area, you'll hear me talk about ENL, and ENL is English as a New Language. That refers to the program, formerly known as ESL. An L is actually the learner, the English language learner. A former L is an English language learner who has reached the highest level of proficiency in English, but who still is entitled, as of the newer regulations, to additional services. So you will hear us talk about former Ls, and they are students that we do have to consider when we're staffing from one year to the next. Again, just some history here. I just pulled up data for the last decade just for you to see, going back 2010, 2015, we generally around between 8 and 12 Ls district-wide. So a very small population here in Bayport Blue Point. But you can see how our population has grown, and especially the last 3 years, significantly. And when we talk about the growth in numbers, which Dr. Harney alluded to before, and we couple that with the new regulations, it does significantly impact staffing here in the district and our program and the services that we have to provide and that we're pleased to provide, but it does have an impact on us. So here's just another way to depict that growth, just for you to see the significant increase in the last few years, percentage-wise, with this population. So to take you back to 2015, New York State came down with some significant changes to their regulations on how this population, the English language learner population, is required to be served within our school districts. And you can see the bullet points. There are some significant changes, a lot of changes. And what I've highlighted are those changes that really impacted us on a budget level and a staffing level. So I'll just give you a second to look at that, and then I'll move on. It continues on to the next screen. So you can see that in significant ways, the state increased its mandates on the way that our population is served. And those mandates did require an increase in staffing for us to remain in compliance. But I also draw your attention to the fourth bullet, which is really a change in culture, where it's set forth that all teachers are teachers of Ls. And on almost any document that comes from New York State Education Department in regard to working with Ls, this is a prominent bullet. All teachers are teachers of Ls. Previously, when students came to a district, any district, and they had no English at all, the idea was, okay, let's teach them English, basic English to get them started, and then we'll get them involved in their content areas. Then we can more fully engage them in their classroom activities. So there was kind of a standalone population. Not necessarily with any bad intention, but that was just the approach. In 2015, New York State said no, there's not enough time to teach kids English first and then get them involved in schools, especially when you had kids coming in the secondary level to begin with. So they really set forth that all teachers are teachers of Ls. So while students will have ENL instruction, they're also immediately from day one placed in content area classes on the secondary level. Of course, in the elementary level, they're always been in a regular classroom, but the idea here is that this is not a standalone population that will eventually be assimilated. It's right from the get-go. These kids need to learn. They need to be in science. They need to be in math. They need to be in social studies. They need to be learning content simultaneously with learning English. And that is a really challenging task. Again, it depends on the age of the student when they're coming and their background. So not every student comes to us with no English. There's a continuum. But it is challenging. So that's a culture shift, and that also speaks to our district goals of professional development. One of the goals, our little department here, I feel like, because there's a lot that we take on and there's a lot that we try to do within our district, is to teach teachers then how to engage these students, because this is something different for our population, our district here. All of a sudden to have a student in the 10th grade social studies class that doesn't have any English at all, but the student needs to pass the Regents to graduate, we have to help our teachers learn how to address the needs of these students. And they're learning academic English along with survival English. And just as a point of information, research shows that students who come to school generally take 5 to 7 years to acquire enough academic English to be successful and graduate. So 5 to 7 years. It's generally between 6 months and 2 years for students to learn social English. So they can assimilate, they can be part of social activities and be part of school and appear to really be doing well and speaking English in that initial period of time. But for them to really acquire the language that's necessary to succeed on grade level, it takes a lot of time. And that's why we really want to support the environment of all teachers being teachers of L's by teaching our teachers how to engage our population. So as I said, there were certain things that were mandated for us to follow to remain in compliance. And as a consequence, we had to add staff. When you look at the combination of additional students and additional requirements, we've had to add staff throughout the years just to maintain, I should say, to remain in compliance. So to talk a little bit about what we've been doing, if I go back to the slide for one sec, you'll see in 2018-19, that's when my position as chair was added, which actually was fortuitous because that happened to be the year we went from 14 to 23 L's. And that year we had 6 L's come without any English at all. So that's, very challenging, all different grade levels. So it was actually good timing to have a chairperson there because there is a lot that goes along with having students come in. There's a lot of testing, there's placement, there's support for the teachers, et cetera. So that year of 2018-19 was significant. And as we added staff, I'm very grateful that some of my teachers are here with me tonight. We really worked hard to try to identify what do we have already and what existing structures are here, but what do we need to improve within this district to improve the students' experience? Because that whole idea of all teachers are teachers of L's and our students needing to be right in the classroom from day one does speak to the connections part of our district goals. So how can we connect this population to our broader population, most effectively? And one thing we realized we needed to do was to develop a report card. And it sounds kind of like, well, why wouldn't you have a report card? But previously, when we only had a few students and one teacher working with them, that teacher knew those students very intimately and could really communicate with those teachers exactly what the needs were. But as we had more students and more teachers involved, we felt, and knowing that 5 to 7 year span of really acquiring academic English, we felt we really needed a tool that would develop more connections so that the classroom teachers and content area teachers could see very discreetly where our students fell on this continuum from entering level to advanced. And what does that mean in classroom practice? What could they reasonably be expected to do? Some kids may have to start out by drawing a picture to show their understanding what they're entering, but at least they're showing their understanding of content. And kids who are closer to commanding, they can be expected to write a paragraph, or essays. So we really worked and looked at a lot of different report cards from other districts, from other states to develop our own. And that's something that we developed over that year and then put into place full year, the following year. But some other things that we did, we developed a grading continuum. We introduced translation services and interpretation services so that, again, this population didn't have to always feed through the ENL teacher. Because previously, our families feel very comfortable with us and come to us for every interaction with the school and are very intimidated by the whole school structure. Because again, some of our families don't need more than just academics. Other of our families don't deal with schools or they're coming from places where they really didn't, or the school is very intimidating. So frequently our teachers are this conduit to any information. However, if we want to establish connections and make these families feel like they are a part of our community, we need to empower teachers and staff throughout the district to have services so that they can speak interpretation services and translation services so that they can communicate directly with the families of our students. And that really broadens our students' feeling of welcome and feeling of being a part of the community. So we also created teacher toolkits, again, to empower teachers to understand what the regulations are, how they can help these kids, what are some strategies at all different levels, and just really trying to put a lot of education out there. And we also brought in some PD from BOCES. So we were very, very busy that very first year that we started out, right? And that rolled right into last year. We had meetings for every single classroom teacher, again, explaining. One thing that's the highlight of last year, we did a lot of things last year, but we had a family orientation evening, basically an open house or back to school night, just for the families of L's, because again, the L's, those families generally don't come to open house because They're not understanding. They don't speak the language. They're not really understanding what this is all about. They feel intimidated. They feel like the spotlight's on them. So they don't sometimes engage. So we had a special night just for them. And that night was great because we brought in different resources from around the district. We had our teachers there at night, and we had stations set up. So the families came, and there was a station where one teacher taught them how to log into the parent portal, how to understand what these are saying. Click here to find this, click here to find that. We had our nurses there to explain immunization and documents that they need, school physicals and sports physicals. We had the public library there, signing people up with public library cards so that they could then take advantage of broader resources in the community. So we had a few different stations. It was really a great night because we also had high school students there. Our Spanish 5 and our AP Spanish students volunteered to serve as translators for the families. And our World Language Club students were in the gym playing games with the kids while the parents were with us. So it was really a great night. And unfortunately this year we couldn't do it with COVID, but we certainly hope to do that again next year because it was really a step towards making those connections, engaging the families with the broader school community. So we did quite a few things, as you can see, and I'd be happy to answer any questions about them, but I'll move ahead. Here are some pictures from that night. This year, we really just continue to do what we've implemented over the last couple of years. We were able to bring in the secondary Ls. That was a demographic designated by the state as a group that should come in person if at all possible, so we're able to do that. So we have been very busy, as I said. It's a small department. We have an excellent team, and again, I'm grateful to have them here. And I have to just take a moment, and I hope you'll indulge me for another moment or two, just to acknowledge the efforts of the ENL teachers, because I know so many teachers dedicated. I've been teaching for 25 years. We always see teachers going above and beyond, but this particular subset of teachers really do go well beyond the classroom. As I said, the families all have their cell phone numbers. They're texting them all the time. You know, there's a snow, there's an opening, there's a closing. They're always in constant contact. And while we want the families to reach out to the broader community, to the broader school community, ultimately it's these teachers they go to. And if we want to facilitate our students' participation and connection with the community, we need to help them. Some of our families, as I said, come and they don't need much. You know, they're fine and they just need the academics. But some of our families have parents who are not at all computer savvy, who don't own a computer. You know, they do everything on their cell phone. And our teachers are signing them up to do the final forms for sports, for example. You know, you want your child to participate in sports, you've got a whole lot of hoops to jump through just online. And our parents, some of them, don't have that computer savvy. So our teachers step in to do that. A lot of it is outside of the classroom. And in addition, we want our students to participate. We've also come to realize some of our kids come and they don't even have some basic, I shouldn't say they don't even, their past experience is so different from our typical students' experiences that when they're asked to write an essay or draw a picture or tell about a time they went to the movies or went pumpkin picking, some of these students have never done those things. So we have had to provide experiences so that they actually can build schema in their minds. They have something to reach back to. They have an experience that they can talk about. And we just step in and fill the gap. We realize they're missing something and we do it. So I can say I've seen, and I know I've done myself in the years I taught ESL, someone on the field flying a kite because this little guy from Pakistan never got to fly a kite. He grew up in an apartment building in the city and he never flew a kite, but they're talking about kites because it's spring. So we just, want to do, and I'll show you some images of different things, but we just kind of step in and give them those experiences, field trips to the movies. We have had kids who, believe it or not, had never been to the movies before, but kids around them, or middle school kids, are all talking about going to the movies all the time. Well, what is that like? What does that mean? And to us, it's so foreign because we all grow up in a typical place here, and all of this is very second nature to us, but these can become obstacles when our students are in among their peers, and they're just grasping the language, and they want to be part of it, but now these kids are talking about things that our population may have had no experience of. We then need to fill that gap because we don't want there to be obstacles. We want to minimize the obstacles so that they can participate more fully in all that we have to offer. So you can just take a look and see there's so much that these teachers do. And like I said, they have liaisons to the nurse, to social workers, to school counselors. We assist often with getting families. If we know there's a material need, we make sure that we fill that need. There's just so much that these ladies do. And again, I'm so grateful for having such a great team. And I know our students benefit from the dedication of these teachers and the fact that they don't just limit their time and their efforts to teaching these students English. There's just so much more than that. So here are some images. As far as students' experience go, we're of course teaching them English and trying to teach them English through their content areas as much as we can. And then we try to give them those hands-on experiences. The image to the right, the picture on the right is, there was the two students on the right were part of a high school science class that took a trip to Brookhaven National Lab. The ENL teacher went with them, and that presenter at BNL was a Spanish-speaking presenter. So they were really excited because they had a chance to get information in their own language. Both of those students had come to high school not speaking any English at all that same year. So it was a great thing for them to be able to hear a presentation. After hours, we do want our students to participate as much as they can in school life, so our teachers will often come back, and we want to encourage our students to come because they often won't if they don't know that we'll be there to help them. So like an after-school thing, this was an evening night at Safe Halloween at Academy Street, so we can kind of coach the kids through what they're supposed to do, and they love it. Pumpkin carving, just again to get literally experience something that's so typical. Even Thanksgiving, this was fun a few years back when we had students who were here for the first fall. They had not experienced Thanksgiving, so we talk about the food, and then they can understand in their classroom when kids are talking about Thanksgiving what that means, because it's really so abstract to them until they've actually experienced it. What did I do? Oh, there we go. Field trip to the movies. So again, we've been fortunate to be able to foster some experiences, and we're very grateful to the administration of this district that has really given us the green light to say, yes, get them out there, yes, take them there, yeah, we'll fundraise, we'll do whatever, let's just get them there so they can have these experiences. This was a field trip to Bolton Center, and if you can believe it, I know this for us with our kids, it's so common, but this was the first time some of those kids had ever gone to Friendly's and just eaten in a restaurant, because we did have a family who came from a very rural area in Ecuador, and this was something different for them. And, it was quite an experience. So again, I just definitely want to say thank you to the team that I have. I have a fantastic team. We really work together. Everyone's got these kids' best interests. Again, going back to those goals, the goals of learning and the connections, and then the professional development, it really is at the forefront. And there's still work to be done. We're always working. We do want to increase PD opportunities for classroom teachers, that they also can continue to be empowered to work with our students effectively. We do want to empower those families to have more communication with the other teachers in the community, not always going through us. We really want them to be embraced, and parents feel that they can reach out as much as teachers feeling they can reach out to the families directly. So there's a lot on our plate, and we're looking forward to tackling our projects as they come along. But I'm grateful for this opportunity to talk to you about what we do, because we're proud of what we do, and we're very, very blessed to work with such a great population, because it's a very rewarding population to work with. And again, I'm grateful to have the support of the district and the administration as we, embark on this journey, which is different every year. As you can see, the numbers go up and the kids come in, and we're just ready there to do what we can to meet their needs. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for that presentation. We truly appreciate it. Any questions from board members?
Not so much a question. Thank you so much for the presentation and all the work you do, and I cannot imagine how hard this year has been in particular for you. So the adaptations you must have gone through, I'm beyond words on how thankful we are to have you. So thank you so much for all the work you do.
Any other trustees? Yeah, I would just say I'm lucky enough to know a student who went through the program here, and I'm so thankful for everything you guys did for him, and so thankful for what you've done for all the students here. So thank you, and keep up the good work, but thank you so much. How about one more round of applause for these guys? Mr. Snyder and Dr. Harney, if we can just come back to a few questions that are in the chat right now. Can we just have a discussion or elaborate on the cut for K-7 and college field trips?
Basically what we did is when we started to look at the cuts, is if you recall, it was about this time last year when we looked at we were talking about a possible cut to aid that would have been coming. So we were charged with the idea of finding 10%, if you recall that, about a year ago. So this is kind of that list that was resurrected from that last year. In terms of the field trips, we are absolutely not sure how much traveling we will be doing next year, and that's one of the areas why we were looking at this. It does not mean if we have the opportunity that we would not look to obviously support our teachers in any of the endeavors that we're looking at, but that was just one of the reasons why we had looked at that.
Thank you, sir. And there's I'd say a few more statements here from a community member, Mr. Capozzi, just giving some exemplars of what the proposition could look like for the busing. So I know Mr. Clayton's going to work on that with you, Dr. Harney. So
Yeah, just thank you, Mr. Capozzi. I'll work with Ingerman and Smith and
Gladly look at what he wants to have us take a look at happily.
Yeah, I think I actually saw it in an email, so I can forward it to you, Mr. Clayton.
there was a comment for you guys. They're so thankful for everything you do. Wonderful presentation, and thank you for sharing it with our thank you for sharing that with our community. But thank you so much. Nice little comment from a parent in here. Just before we go, Ms. Kane, I just wanted to make sure we answered your question. I know you brought it up with additional comment. I guess I'll just throw it back to Mr. Harney. Just ensuring that the cuts may be restrictions in place related to COVID, lower enrollment, or specific grades, or any cancellations. I know you kind of just answered the field trips, but I know she put a couple.
I'm going to ask you to clarify that. Say that again.
In regards to the K-7 field trips and the college field trips, she just wanted to make sure that it potentially could be from COVID, potentially could be lower enrollment, or specific field trip cancellations, or something else.
Correct. It's not where we're looking to remove field trips, if that's the question.
I guess if we are, what would be the purpose? I guess she's asking again.
If we were to what?
If anything, rationale for K-7 field trips.
We had looked at the previous cuts from last year when we were talking about the 10%. We're taking into consider COVID.
She's good.
Oh, okay. Perfect.
Thank you, Ms. Conley. Sorry. Any other questions, just please put them in the chat, but we will go to the agenda, and we'll answer any other questions that you may have. Moving on to the regular agenda, can I have a motion to approve consent agenda items G, H, I, J, K, and L? Mr. Siri, second by Mr. Krug. Any discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries 5-0. Moving on to community new business. Any questions for Dr. Harney or the board in general? Mr. Roop? Thank you, Mr. Rube. I know it's very much appreciated. It's been a unique year for all the administrators, so I'm sure they appreciate that. Any other community questions?
I will share, just as we're sitting here, the aid runs have come out, though we have not had time to dissect them, so hopefully in the next day or two we'll be able to update the board. So they did come out tonight. I forwarded them to you as we're sitting here. One of our local legislators had sent them to myself.
So does that mean we would not have to have another meeting?
I think it's going to depend on what these numbers look like.
All right, so we'll be in touch, and we'll update everyone in regards to the numbers and if another board meeting is needed. I'm not hearing any community members with any questions online or in person. We will turn it over to trustee new business. Not hearing any, can I have a motion to adjourn? It goes Mr. Broski, second by Mr. Siri. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate the presentation. We will see you on April 20th, potentially before.